Black Ops 3 is a strange game within the context of the series as a whole. It's kind of divisive, all things considered. Many people love the multiplayer and the zombies offerings. This was arguably the point where zombies itself finally exploded into something more mainstream. Others really disliked them, with multiplayer still including boost jumping futuristic stuff, and some of the zombies maps feeling kind of unfinished. One thing that's pretty universal though is that most people who tried the campaign for Black Ops 3 don't like the campaign for Black Ops 3. So what did I think? It's complicated. So to start out, let's get some of the basic stuff out of the way. Black Ops 3 was far and away the longest title up to this point, taking me a bit over 7 hours to complete. I'd heard horror stories of its length, and while I do indeed think it's too long, it's not near as bad as I'd been led to believe. Performance was pretty solid for me, which is apparently not the norm. I think the reason for this is that I was capturing the game while it was running at 1080p on a PS4 Pro, so if I had to guess, Black Ops 3 probably offers a 1080p mode rather than super sampling from a higher resolution, which led to a pretty solid 60 FPS the whole time as far as I noticed. That's not what you get if you play it on a Pro at a higher resolution. Beyond this, Black Ops 3 has a lot of 30 FPS cutscenes strewn throughout, similar to Advanced Warfare. However, a ton of them are mixed in with gameplay, which is much more jarring than what Advanced Warfare did. Since they lead in and out of gameplay directly, the transition between the frame rates really bothered me. According to Jason Schreier's article on the crunch developers faced during the development of Black Ops 4, Black Ops 3's campaign was supposed to be an open world affair, but issues forced them to rework it into a more traditional campaign about halfway through. And when you look at a lot of the design, that makes a ton of sense. Lots of long cutscenes, much greater length, some really rushed progression gates that feel broken when compared to previous titles, and even the option to play the missions out of order for some reason, almost as if in the original concept you were supposed to be able to tackle said missions at your leisure. There's also a type of enemy that shows up in the earlier missions but then suddenly is nowhere to be seen for the rest of the game, with no explanation. The story also starts rather confusingly and throws a lot of terms at you really quickly, and only straightens them out after a few missions. It has much fewer missions than usual, which means some missions are over an hour long. It even has boss fights, which is new to the series. Though unremarkable, they're not that bad either. This campaign actually takes the most risks so far for sure. But this all leads back pretty smoothly to the lofty development goals they had, the troubles they dealt with, and the transition to linearity the project underwent. There's even a seeming meta-narrative that strongly suggests that the player isn't real, the first main character you get to create yourself, by the way, and that instead you're sort of reliving a warped version of the memories of the primary villain as he's dying after the first mission of the game takes place. The first mission is actually supposed to be the last mission, and it all goes wrong, but unless you look incredibly deep at small details, I don't think most players are going to pick up on that. Once again though, Black Ops always offers twists like this, so it doesn't surprise me at all. And though messy, the story that you will get in the game isn't awful. It's also worth noting that this is probably the most brutal game up to this point, but it just feels like shock value stuff most of the time, so I personally didn't care much for it. It's also the first game with a romantic subplot, so that's a thing. So what about the gameplay then? How does it fare? Well, as I said, there are a lot of points where you're gated by things like doors, which is normal for the series, but it seems significantly less elegant here than in the previous titles. Many times this is because the markers telling you where to go show up before you can actually move forward. Instead, you're expected to wait for an ally to open the door for you or whatever. This is the way it works in the other titles too most of the time, but the allies are usually so quick that it's a momentary pause. In Black Ops 3, you can sometimes be expected to wait 10 to 15 seconds while they dawdle around in the previous room conversing with nobody. Flinch is minimal here, thankfully, and it can be lessened even further if you so choose, as per the last few games. Boosting around is back, but it's different from Advanced Warfare. It's rather smooth instead of launching the player a set distance. You no longer have air dodges or the ground pound, and instead you have a limited boost meter you can use as you see fit, and the ability to run across walls. I love the wall running for sure, and it would have been great if it had been in Advanced Warfare, but otherwise I think this boost system is a step down from the previous title. It's not near as fast, is missing any real offensive options, and can really only shoot you upwards. Sure, you have more nuance in how much you boost, but it doesn't feel like a dynamic movement option. Instead, it feels like a flutter you simply use to ascend. What's more, getting shot now stops sprint, slides, and boosting instantly, which is nonsense. It not only feels terrible in action, but it means if you try to slide to cover and you get shot right once you press the button, you'll either crouch or go prone instead, which is the last thing you want to do when you're trying to escape enemy fire to regroup. Thankfully, it does improve from here in some ways. Last stand, explosive spam, and infinitely spawning galleries of enemies are basically a non-issue here. Sprint is now also infinite, which I feel was a much needed change, since sprinting recklessly is already something that gets punished thanks to the sprint out time, which is the time between exiting sprint and being able to aim or shoot your gun. This honestly should have been introduced like a billion games ago. The player also has a lot of other new abilities and options thanks to the return of the loadout system from Black Ops 2, which can be interesting in theory. You have several categories of abilities, a multitude of weapons, perks, and more to equip. That being said, in some ways they feel kind of incompatible with the game itself. A lot of the abilities just don't see enough practical use, and you're unlikely to level up enough to unlock everything on one regular difficulty playthrough, which means some options you'll just never get access to unless you play it again. That would make some sense if the missions weren't so linear. Once again, harking back to the open world design concept. But I more or less only used two of the abilities anyway, the bees and immolation. It's not that the others don't have use. In particular, I totally forgot there was a hacking ability, which would have rendered the big, dumb, annoying bullet sponge robots much more bearable, since I would have been able to hack one and then use it to take down the others. Because I didn't have that ability tree equipped much, instead I had to spend minutes on end carefully shooting explosives at them on repeat. They throw a ton of these big mechs at you later on, which became torturously annoying. They really should have made it more interesting to deal with these mech enemies if you aren't hacking, because the humanoid robots are great. Humanoid robots take a decent chunk more damage than humans to take down, so they can be overwhelming if you're not careful. However, with immolation you can catch one of them on fire, which will then explode, which can catch others on fire and create a chain reaction. Timing this well is incredibly satisfying. But otherwise, the best ability for me, which broke the game, was the Robot Bee option. Not only could it eventually catch human enemies on fire, but it distracts any enemies it touches. And the bees can spread really far. Enemies are basically harmless, wide-open targets when distracted by the bees, so you can just take pot shots until everyone's dead. If I break it down though, most of the game was still just running and shooting dudes. It's almost nothing but that in fact, with few exceptions. The three major standout moments I enjoyed consisted of this small stealth area here, the part where you're grappling between trees, and definitely the spooky mission where Diaz is controlling the robots in a facility you infiltrate. This mission in particular has some great atmosphere, one of the better boss fights, robot zombie style enemies, and a cool flooded escape sequence. Otherwise though, this game was pretty standard and lifeless. There's also a zombies campaign that reuses all of the levels, but reworks them into a different order and an alternate apocalyptic story, where zombies have taken over the world. I didn't try this, but it seems interesting, since you can gain power-ups similar to the actual zombies mode, and you find random weapons in the mystery box. All while being drowned in zombies, so it's not like there isn't more to it if you do want it. Though I've heard this mode is incredibly rushed and broken. While I greatly appreciate the focus on abilities and raw mechanics over sparkly set pieces that look cool but don't play well, the actual encounters in Black Ops 3 are often uninspired and many of my abilities are simply overpowered or underpowered. Black Ops 3 wasn't a bad game by any means, it's pretty solid, but I had much more fun with Advanced Warfare. Still, I can see how Black Ops 3 could have been the best game in the series had the original concept actually been finished and polished.